In this episode, we take a closer look at one of the most widely used ways to organize cybersecurity thinking, because the National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST Cybersecurity Framework, CSF, has become a common reference point for leaders, practitioners, and organizations that need a clearer way to talk about cyber risk. For a brand new learner, the framework can seem larger and more formal than it really is, especially because people often mention it in quick shorthand and assume everyone already understands what it does. The better way to see it is as a practical structure for deciding how an organization should understand, prioritize, communicate, and improve cybersecurity outcomes over time. It is not just for one sector, one technology type, or one size of organization. It is meant to be broadly usable, and NIST describes CSF 2.0 as guidance that can help any organization manage cybersecurity risk through high-level outcomes rather than through one required implementation method. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyberauthor.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A useful place to start is by clearing away one of the biggest misconceptions about the framework, which is the idea that it is simply a long checklist of controls. That is not the most helpful way to understand it. The CSF is better understood as a structured language for thinking about cybersecurity in a way that connects leadership priorities, operational work, risk decisions, and improvement efforts. It helps organizations ask better questions before they rush into solutions. What are we trying to protect? What risks matter most here? Which outcomes are already strong, and which are weak? How do we explain our cybersecurity posture in plain terms that business leaders can actually use? That is why the framework has remained so influential. It does not begin by forcing an organization into a narrow technical design. It begins by helping people organize the conversation about cybersecurity so decisions become clearer, responsibilities become more visible, and progress becomes easier to evaluate. One of the most important official ideas in CSF 2.0 is the structure of the core, because that is the part most people encounter first. NIST organizes the core around 6 functions: govern, identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. Beneath those functions are categories, which group related cybersecurity outcomes, and then subcategories, which break those outcomes into more specific pieces. NIST also makes an important point that beginners often miss. The order of the functions, categories, and subcategories does not automatically mean sequence or priority, and the functions should be addressed concurrently rather than treated like a one-time march from beginning to end. The framework is also meant to apply across many types of environments, including traditional information technology, internet-connected devices, operational technology, cloud, mobile, and changing future technologies. That wide applicability is one reason the CSF is so useful in governance conversations. The govern function deserves special attention because it helps explain why CSF 2.0 feels more clearly management-oriented than many people expect. Security programs often struggle not because teams lack effort, but because leadership direction is weak, priorities are unclear, risk ownership is vague, and accountability is inconsistent. Govern addresses that larger layer. It reminds organizations that cybersecurity does not begin with a tool or an alert. It begins with direction, oversight, policy, roles, expectations, and the relationship between cyber risk and enterprise risk. When an organization uses the govern function well, it starts asking harder but healthier questions. Who is accountable for major security decisions? How is risk tolerance understood? How are cybersecurity priorities tied to mission and business goals? What structures exist to review performance and adjust direction over time? That kind of thinking is extremely important on the CISM path because governance is where mature security stops being reactive and starts becoming intentional. The identify function seems simple on the surface, but it becomes very powerful once you understand what it is trying to accomplish. An organization cannot protect what it does not understand, and it cannot make wise risk decisions about systems, data, services, suppliers, or dependencies it has never clearly recognized. Identify pushes the organization to build a clearer picture of its environment. That includes what assets matter, which business processes are most important, where sensitive information lives, what technologies support critical work, and which outside relationships affect the security posture. For beginners, this function is a reminder that security starts long before a technical safeguard is turned on. It starts with awareness of context. If a company has only a partial grasp of its important systems and information, then even good intentions elsewhere in the program will be weaker than they appear. Strong protection depends on accurate visibility, and identify is where that visibility starts to take shape in a disciplined way. The protect function is often the one people think they already understand because it feels closest to the everyday image of cybersecurity. This is the part many learners associate with controls, safeguards, access limitations, awareness efforts, and protective measures designed to reduce the chance or impact of harm. That instinct is not wrong, but protect is more meaningful when it is seen in the context created by the earlier functions. Protection works best when governance has already set direction and when the organization already knows what matters most. Without that foundation, protection can easily become uneven, overly reactive, or driven by habit rather than risk. A mature use of protect means more than putting barriers in place. It means selecting and supporting safeguards that fit the organization's mission, risk profile, operating model, and people. Good protection is rarely only technical. It also involves process clarity, user responsibility, and a realistic understanding of how the organization actually works from day to day. The detect function exists because prevention is never perfect, and this is one of the most realistic lessons in the entire framework. New learners sometimes imagine strong security as a state where nothing bad gets through, but mature security management assumes that unusual events, suspicious behavior, and outright incidents will sometimes occur despite careful effort. Detection is therefore not a sign that security failed completely. In many cases, it is a sign that the organization has built enough visibility to notice trouble before the damage becomes much worse. Detect is about discovering anomalies, signs of attack, misuse, or weakness early enough that the organization still has room to act. That early recognition can change the whole outcome of an event. A problem discovered quickly is often easier to contain, explain, and recover from than one that remains invisible for too long. This is why detection should never be treated as an optional extra added after protection. It is part of the core logic of responsible cyber risk management. The respond function becomes crucial the moment an organization realizes that something real is happening and that normal operations must shift into coordinated action. This is where many hidden weaknesses in governance and planning suddenly become visible. A company may have strong intentions, but if nobody knows who decides, who communicates, who investigates, who escalates, or how priorities should shift under pressure, the response can become confused and slow. Respond is about more than technical action. It includes communication, coordination, analysis, decision-making, and the discipline needed to control impact while uncertainty is still high. That is why the framework places so much importance on being ready before an incident occurs. Good response does not appear out of nowhere in the middle of stress. It grows from clear roles, practiced thinking, and the ability to connect operational reality with leadership judgment. For a CISM student, this is a valuable reminder that incident management is always both technical and organizational at the same time. Recover is sometimes misunderstood as the final cleanup stage, but it is much more important than that. Recovery is where the organization works to restore services, stabilize operations, rebuild confidence, and learn from what has happened. In practical terms, this often means more than bringing systems back online. It may involve repairing trust with customers, improving communications with leadership, adjusting control decisions, reviewing dependencies, and making sure the same type of event is less damaging in the future. Recovery matters because organizations do not experience incidents only as technical interruptions. They experience them as business disruptions, reputational challenges, and tests of resilience. A company that can respond but not recover well may still suffer lasting damage. The framework is wise to include recover as a distinct function because it reminds leaders that cybersecurity is not only about defense and reaction. It is also about continuity, restoration, and the disciplined return to stable operation after a significant disruption. Beyond the core, one of the most practical features of the CSF is the idea of profiles. NIST explains that an organizational profile can describe an organization's current and target cybersecurity posture, and the framework lays out a basic pattern for using profiles that includes defining scope, gathering relevant information, building the profile, comparing current and target conditions, developing a prioritized action plan, and repeating the cycle over time. That is extremely useful because it turns the framework from a theory document into a planning tool. Instead of asking only whether the CSF sounds sensible, an organization can use profiles to ask where it is now, where it wants to go, and what gaps separate those two states. For beginners, this is one of the clearest ways to understand how the framework becomes operational. A profile helps convert broad outcomes into a specific improvement conversation that matches the organization's own environment and priorities rather than someone else's generic model. The tiers are another part of the framework that beginners often hear about without fully understanding. NIST says the tiers characterize the rigor of an organization's cybersecurity risk governance and management practices, and it names four: partial, risk-informed, repeatable, and adaptive. The tiers describe a progression from more ad hoc behavior toward approaches that are more agile, risk-informed, and continuously improving. But NIST is also clear that they are meant to complement an organization's own risk management methodology rather than replace it. That point matters a great deal. The tiers are not best understood as a bragging badge or a simple maturity trophy. Their real value is that they help an organization describe how seriously and consistently it is managing cybersecurity risk and where improvement may be needed. Used well, they create context for honest discussion. Used poorly, they can be reduced to status language that sounds impressive without changing actual behavior. Another strength of CSF 2.0 is that NIST did not leave organizations with only the base document. The framework is supported by additional resources that help people adopt and use it more practically. NIST describes three major types of supplemental resources: informative references, which map the core to standards, guidelines, regulations, and other content; implementation examples, which offer concise notional examples of how outcomes might be achieved; and quick start guides, which distill parts of the framework into practical starting points for organizations. This is important because the CSF is intentionally not prescriptive. It defines outcomes, but it expects organizations to connect those outcomes to the methods, controls, and references that make sense in their own setting. That design gives the framework flexibility without leaving users unsupported, which is one reason it works well across very different kinds of organizations and security maturity levels. A deeper look at the framework also reveals several misconceptions that are worth correcting early. The first is that the CSF is only for federal agencies or critical infrastructure. NIST explicitly presents it as usable by organizations regardless of size, sector, or maturity, which means it can help far beyond one narrow audience. The second mistake is assuming the framework tells an organization exactly which tool to buy or exactly how to implement every control. It does not. NIST says plainly that the framework does not prescribe how outcomes should be achieved. The third mistake is thinking that the framework is only a technical model. In reality, the addition and placement of govern, along with the use of profiles, tiers, and risk-oriented outcomes, show that the CSF is as much about leadership, communication, and management discipline as it is about technical safeguards. That broader view is exactly what makes it so valuable in governance and strategy discussions. For someone studying CISM, the biggest value of the CSF is not memorizing the names of its parts in isolation. The deeper value is learning to think in the same structured way the framework encourages. Govern pushes you to start with direction and accountability. Identify teaches you to understand what matters before acting. Protect and detect remind you that prevention and visibility must work together. Respond and recover reinforce that security leadership includes disciplined action during and after disruption, not just barrier building beforehand. Profiles and tiers add a way to compare current and future states and to discuss the seriousness of risk management practices without losing sight of organizational context. When you put all of that together, the framework becomes more than a reference model. It becomes a practical way to organize cybersecurity as a living management discipline, which is exactly the kind of thinking strong security leaders need.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.